thank you everyone for joining us today. We're going to be talking about how to leverage Polarity Splunk integration to really maximize your Splunk investment. So just a quick intro, I'm Ed Dorsey. I'm the CTO and co-founder here at Polarity. And prior to Polarity, I worked as an intelligence analyst. I spent a lot of time working on methodology and algorithm development, also working on analyst tools, and trying to figure out ways to extract intelligence out of large amounts of data. So how to make data useful for analysts, if I had to sum it up. So today we're going to be talking through the Polarity Splunk integration. We're going to kind of cover the various use cases for it, how it can be used, how we are seeing it being used, and maybe some of the lesser known features and capabilities of it, as well as some things to think about if you're using the integration. So let's just jump right in here. So at its core, what the Splunk integration does, that the Polarity Splunk integration does, is it allows you to provide a custom SPL query. And then when analysts who are subscribed to the integration run a search on an entity or an indicator, it's going to trigger that custom SPL search. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to really encapsulate subject matter expertise that folks on your team might have in the integration itself, and make it really easy for everybody, including folks who might not be familiar with SPL or even with the inner workings or what indexes you have in your Splunk deployment, to be able to use that data and gain value out of that data. So the first step to using the integration, of course, is to craft an SPL query. So I've got pretty much the simplest SPL query you could give to our integration. I wouldn't recommend using this. We're going to kind of build on this, but to start, we're going to search all indexes for the given entity. And you'll notice this kind of funny looking syntax here. We've got this word entity in all caps. It's surrounded by curly braces on both sides. And what the integration does is this is basically a template variable, and it's going to substitute anywhere you have this curly brace, entity, close curly brace with the indicator entity that the user is searching. So for example, in this query here, if the user was searching Google DNS 8.8.8.8, the actual query that would go to Splunk would be index equals star 8.8.8.8. One thing I'll note is that we put quotes around the entity. This is pretty important since periods are minor breakers in Splunk. If you don't add the quotes, Splunk is actually going to tokenize your IP on these minor breakers, and your IP search will become 127 and 0 and 1. Which probably isn't what you want in most cases. So always remember to put those quotes around the curly braces here. So let's kind of make this query a little bit better so that we can use it and show it working in Polarity here. What we're going to do, of course, is rather than search all indexes, we're going to search a specific index. So we're going to say, let's search the firewall index. And we generally recommend that you try to narrowly tailor what the integration is searching. One, because it's going to allow the analyst to have a better idea of what that integration is doing, but also it's generally going to have performance benefits. Then we don't want to return all the data when we run that. If we had 10,000 records that match on a particular IP and someone happens to search that, we don't want to send all 10,000 results back to the integration window or to the Polarity server. And we definitely don't want Splunk doing the work to fetch that data. So we're going to limit the results here. In this case, I'm just limiting it to the first 5. You could do the first 10, the first 15, whatever it might be. And now what we want to do is we want to name our integration. So out of the box, when you install the Splunk integration, it's going to just be called Splunk. It's going to have a fairly generic description, and it's going to have a fairly generic acronym. But as we mentioned earlier, you want to kind of narrowly tailor the query, which means you also want to inform the user what is the purpose of this integration. So in this case, we're going to call our integration Splunk Firewall. We're going to change the acronym to SPL-FW, and we're going to add a description, or we're going to change the default description to say search firewall logs by source or destination IP. And you can do this very easily. You can actually just open up the config.js file in the integration on your server. You can modify these values and then make a couple changes, restart, and have it appear. And this is what it's going to look like. So here I've got the generic Splunk integration where I've renamed it. I'm giving it a more useful description for analysts that might be looking through the integrations. And you can see here the custom acronym. So instead of just saying Splunk with a generic description, we've got Splunk Firewall, we've got our acronym, and we've got a nice description here. You can see also that I've just subscribed to this. So whatever we end up with for our SPL query, I have encapsulated all that SPL query logic And as a user, all I need to know that if I'm interested in searching firewall logs, I can just hit the subscribe button and I'm good to go. I know now that I'm going to be searching firewall logs. So we've got our integration named. Generally, you're going to want to restrict the time range that the integration is searching against. Unless you, most folks have a lot of data in Splunk. That's why they have Splunk in the first place. And so you might not want to search everything there is. And depending on the use case for the query that you're crafting, you might only want to search the first, the last 6 months, the last week, the last day. We default this to the last month. And so we actually built this into the integration as an option. It's not something that you even need to include in your query because we wanted to make sure that we were putting some constraints on the SPL query that you provide in the event that you forget to add that time range. It's a lot like the Splunk search app, which has a default time range to keep you from searching everything by accident every time. So there's an earliest time bounds option in the integration. If you go into the settings here, it's right here. So for my settings here, I'm searching the last 5 years. It defaults to the last month. And so you can easily change this and you don't have to worry about including that earlier string in your SPL query itself. Now, a lot of logs have a lot of data in them, right? There's a lot of fields. Not all of those fields are going to be useful to analysts. To make life easier for the analyst, again, we're trying to encapsulate, right, the knowledge that your team has and make it as easy as possible for folks that are using the integration. We might only want to return certain fields. So in this case, we're just going to return the source port, dest, and dest port fields when we do this search. It's important to note that if you're able to, you can filter by fields in your query. So previously we were not doing that. We're just doing an open-ended search on the entity. Not all logs will, lend themselves to this. It's going to depend on your data. But if you know, for example, that the IP address always appears in the source or the IP field, you can specify that field, and that's going to help Splunk out. It's going to make things a little bit more efficient. For now, for our query, we're going to do it open-ended. Let's say this is a log format where the IP could show up in numerous places, and we can't predetermine that. What we might want to do, though, is we might want to take some of those fields that are not very human readable, and we might want to rename them so that when they get displayed in the integration, they're very easy for our analysts to interpret. We can use the rename command for that. So here we're going to rename source to source IP and source P to source port, etc. And the final modification we're going to make is we're going to switch to this term query here. So you can see it right here. We've got this term directive. So what the term directive does is, one, it gets rid of the need for the quotes, because whatever is inside of this term directive is going to be searched as is. The whole string is going to be searched exactly as it's provided. It's not going to be broken up. But there's some other benefits. So one, we don't need the quotes. It's going to be an exact match search. Two, and this is the big one, the Splunk will only search your time series index files. So when you use that term directive, the only thing that's going to get searched is your index files, which means that your search performance is going to improve greatly. We've seen, speed ups of 5x in some of our queries just by adding this little directive here around your term. Now, you can't just use it all the time. There are some limitations, right? So there are specific cases where you can use it. Luckily, for the types of logs that information security analysts are looking at, it's usually applicable. You can usually use it. But there are two rules here. The term itself that you're searching on cannot contain major breakers, and the term must be bound by major breakers in the source data. So I know it's only two rules. They're a little bit hard to parse there. So I've got an example. So let's say this is our log format. We have 127.001-admin. If this is our log, when Splunk tokenizes this, it's going to find two tokens. It's going to have the IP and then the word admin, and they're going to be independently indexed. The reason for this is because both of these tokens or both of these strings have major breakers between them. A space is a major breaker. So you can see there's a space here. And so we get our two tokens. And that means when we search on our term 127.0.0.1, there is a string in the index file that matches that search. In addition, the thing that we're searching on does not have any major breakers in it. So periods are considered minor breakers. So we meet both of these rules here. The term we're searching on, 127.0.0.1, an IP address, which is a lot of times what we're going to be searching on, doesn't contain any major breakers. And in the data that was indexed, the term 127.0.0.1 was bound by or surrounded by major breakers. So it works great. You're going to get a huge performance improvement and everyone will be happy. This is another log format here where this is not going to work quite as easily. So in this case, an equal sign is a minor breaker. And that means Splunk's not going to break this apart. And so what's going to get indexed is this entire string IP equals 127.0.0.1. So you can imagine if what you're searching on is just the IP, this is not going to match, right? This string here does not match our search term. And so you're not going to get any results. And that's going to probably be a surprise, right? Users are going to be like, hey, why didn't this come back? Now, the great thing is we can easily make this work even in the Polarity Splunk integration because of that string substitution capability with this curly brace entity. So instead of having our search just be term and then entity and curly braces, we can have our search be term IP equals entity and curly braces. And now our search term is going to match. Again, we don't have any major breakers in the search term, so we're good there. And our string here is surrounded by major breakers, spaces on both sides, and the two match, so we're going to get our results. So if you're going to be using this term directive, you just need to think a little bit about the format of your logs. If you're already using our integration and you're already a Polarity customer, just reach out to us. We're more than happy to take a look and help you get this configured. But it's a really great way to really boost performance of your queries. So let's show an example of what this looks like. We're going to go back to our Splunk firewall. I've got it enabled. And now I'm going to trigger a search on an IP address that I know is going to show up in that index. And you can see I've got all of my data coming back here. Now I purposely made all the Splunk ones very bright colors so they kind of stand out here. So we've got our 5 results. And you can see I can look at the results directly here in the overlay window. I can see it in JSON or tabular or the source view. It's letting me know what the earliest search time is. So as an analyst, I know how far back we're looking. And then if I want to pivot out into Splunk itself, all I have to do is click on this link, and it's going to go ahead and trigger that search in the search app, making it very easy for me if I need to further investigate within the search app itself. So we're going to go ahead and clear this out and move on to a little bit more complex examples. So we mentioned that the goal, right, and one of the benefits of the integration, the Polarity Splunk integration, is that encapsulates subject matter expertise. So this is a tstats query. What it's doing is it's returning the first and last seen information for an IP address. So what we've done is we've created a Splunk NetFlow integration. We've basically taken the same Splunk integration. We've just changed the name like we did before with Splunk Firewall. We gave it a new acronym, and we gave it a nice description here. Returns first and last seen information of IP addresses. And what this query is doing is it's looking for the first seen time and the last seen time in the NetFlow index, using that term directive for the performance boost. And it's going to basically group this together by index and source type, and then it's going to compress the rows. So it's using this value. So instead of having a lot of rows of results, it's going to compress all of this results that are grouped by index and source type and basically make a comma delimited column. The only thing down here that's a little weird, if you're looking at this, that you might think is a little strange, is this eval entity down at the bottom. What this does is it just adds a column to the final result with our entity value. And the reason we need to do this is because the Polarity Splunk integration leverages the mSearch endpoint. It uses multi-search. So if you look up 5 or 6 IP addresses, instead of firing 6 queries out to Splunk, it does one bulk lookup request. And that means that all the results coming back, we have to remap them to the entity. And so as a result, we need to make sure that in each row that comes back, the entity that we looked up exists. For most queries that you're going to be doing, the entity is always going to exist in the results because the whole reason for the query is to find the entity. Tstats are a little bit special because they're kind of a statistics-based search. The entity might not always exist. And so we're going to go ahead and insert it in there. So let's see what this looks like. We're going to change my filter here. We're going to go to our Splunk NetFlow integration. I'm going to go ahead and turn it on. This is going to return first and last seen information. And then I'm going to go ahead and trigger my search. So you can see here in the overlay window in this nice bright green, make it very easy. We can see that this IP address showed up in our NetFlow logs. This is the first time it was seen, the last time it was seen. I can drill down into it, and here are all those records from the NetFlow log. You'll notice that this is not the raw data. It's not the raw NetFlow data. In most cases, the analysts probably aren't going to be analyzing the raw NetFlow data in the Polarity interface. Instead, we're giving this roll up to the analyst, right? We've captured kind of this knowledge on how to ask questions of this data. And as an analyst, all I need to do is just turn it on. And now I can see the first time we've seen this, the last time we've seen it, and how many records exist. So in this case, 25,000. And if I want to go ahead and run that search in Splunk, again, I can just click on it and return that, run that tstats search here in Splunk. So a couple of things here. These are things to think about, right, when you're configuring the Splunk integration. One is that Splunk can really search anything. So by default, a Polarity integration is going to have a lot of entity types enabled, and Splunk is no exception because you can have lots of different types of data in Splunk. And what that means is we want to make sure that when we're configuring our integration, we're thinking about what kind of data we want to send to the integration. So every integration in Polarity has this manage integration data option. And in this case, it's NetFlow. And so maybe we're only collecting IPv4 NetFlow. And so we don't want to send emails or domains, right? We don't want to look up a domain in our NetFlow data. It's not going to be in there, or a hash or a CVE. And so the only entity type we check is IPv4. We ensure that this is set for all our users. So none of our users even have to think about this setting. And then we're good to go. We just hit apply changes. I've already got it set up. And now if a user looks up a domain, this Splunk NetFlow integration isn't going to do anything. It's not going to send anything out to Splunk, and we're not going to unnecessarily run a search that doesn't need to be run. So again, this is optimizing entity types. This is really important for any Polarity integration, but Splunk in particular, really think about what kind of data could be in that index and then turn off everything that couldn't be there. The next thing we're going to talk about is index discovery. This is a capability built into our integration. And what it does is it lets you know what indexes contain information about the entity that you're searching. Rather than require you to write out this query, it's a fairly long meta search query. It's just an option in the integration. So if I go here to our index discovery, and I'm going to turn this on, all you need to do is go down to the search type and choose index discovery search. And now the integration basically reconfigures itself. You don't have to provide any custom SPL. And when I run a search on something, you're going to see now we're getting this SPL index result. And what that's doing is it's doing a very efficient search across one moment. Sorry about that. I've had some previous audio issues, and I was worried that one of my colleagues was letting me know there was some audio issues, but that doesn't appear to be the case. So we've got Splunk index discovery turned on, and you can see this is really great. What it does is it actually allows us to see what indexes are available across all of our indexes. So where does data exist? It's basically discovering where data exists, and I don't need to even know ahead of time, what SPL query to write or which indexes might be valid. And again, I can just pivot. So if I'm seeing, oh, look, there's information in our blue coat index, I can just pivot out and I can see what that information is. If you keep seeing the same index showing up over and over again, then maybe that's the point where you say, let's make a custom SPL query and implement that in the integration. So this is really about knowledge discovery. You don't need to know ahead of time where the data is. We're going to let you know. And for organizations with larger Splunk deployments, this is really, really, really helpful. I would say, a majority of our customers turn on this capability within the Splunk integration. So we just showed that example. A couple things here. It is customizable. So by default, we are searching across all indexes. There's going to be scenarios where you don't want to do that. Maybe you want to search all indexes, but a couple of indexes. You can easily configure that right in the integration. You could also give a list of indexes that you want to search. That's very easy to do. And you can also modify that term query itself. So by default, it's just doing that term entity search. But if we have that example before where your logs have this format IP equals, you can very easily customize that. It's all done right through the UI. Another thing that might happen is you might start running searches against Splunk that you don't really want to search. Let's say 127.0.1. Let's say you have just a lot of logs that have localhost in them for whatever reason, or it could be an IP of a server that you just know about and you don't want it to come back all the time. You can just ignore that. So this is a normal capability within Polarity. You can ignore right from the overlay window. We're going to go ahead and ignore this entity here, 127. Now it's on our ignore list. So if I run the search again, you're going to see that the search doesn't run. We're not going to send something unexpected, or we're not going to send something to Splunk that doesn't need to be set. I can very easily manage that right from the ignore manager right here. So if I needed to take this off, just a click of a button, and now that search will work again. So the next thing we'll talk about is installing multiple Splunk integrations. And I think folks have probably noticed this, but I've actually got more than one Splunk integration installed. In fact, I've got 4 installed. This is, again, is a great capability. It means for each question you want to ask of Splunk, create a Splunk integration, rename it, craft that SPL query. And now as an analyst, I can come in here. I know exactly what each one of these does. I don't even need to understand how it works. I don't need to know the SPL query or where the index is, or what the time duration I'm allowed to search. All that's been configured for me. I can just turn on the things I need and then get on with my job. We also have an RBAC capability, or role-based access control. So for example, if you don't want all your analysts to have access to Splunk NetFlow data, maybe just the security engineering team needs that, you can apply role-based access control to these different Splunk integrations to ensure that folks have access to the things that they need to be more efficient at their job. Finally, in a multi-SIM environment, right? There are definitely organizations that might have Splunk. They might have Splunk and some Elastic sitting around. Maybe one team uses Elastic and another team uses Splunk. Maybe you've got Chronicle. Maybe you're using Microsoft products. And without Polarity, you've got to go out and search all of these one at a time. With Polarity in place, you're not just limited to Splunk. I've also got Elasticsearch on here. So I've got 4 different Elasticsearch integrations. I've got Chronicle on here. And if we do a search on our always favorite Google DNS, you can see I can get results back from all of those near instantly. So I've got my Splunk firewall. I've got that Splunk index discovery. I've got my Elasticsearch proxy logs coming back. And we've got Chronicle coming back as well. So I can very easily pivot between all these different SIM and data stores. And because I'm using Polarity, it's just a single search, but now I can see all of that data. And if you are using Elasticsearch, the integration is very similar to what we've talked about today with the Splunk integration. Finally, if you are a Splunk shop, if you've got Splunk, you can enable our Polarity source analytics, and you're able to send all of the server's source analytics into Splunk. And that gives you 2 really cool capabilities. At a strategic level, you get access to this source analytics dashboard. And then at the tactical level, it gives you access to the source analytics integration. And let me show you what that looks like. This is the dashboard here. And this is giving you an overview of all the searches happening across your Polarity platform. So what's being searched, who's doing the searching, whether or not integrations are returning results, what types of entities are being searched, and even, depending on how you have it configured, what tools are being used by your analysts. This is a very kind of strategic high-level view of the data being used, and we're leveraging Splunk to do that. So if you're a Splunk shop, you can really just point the data right into Splunk using a universal forwarder, and then have access to all these dashboards. In addition, there's a much more tactical view. We have this Polarity source analytics integration here that I just clicked on. And what it's doing is it's telling the analyst, when was this last search? When was it last seen? Who saw it over what time period? So you can see you get this nice histogram. In this case, 8.8.8.8, of course, it gets searched a lot, over 8,000 times in the last 3 months. Here are the users that have been doing it. Here are the integrations and the data coming back from those integrations. And even where was it first seen? So you can see last seen 39 minutes ago. First seen process name, Brave browser. So it gives me insight as an analyst into whether or not the thing I'm looking at is the first time my team's looking at it, or is it the 100th time that I'm looking at it? And all of this, of course, is leveraging your Splunk infrastructure to power that. So just a quick recap, we kind of talked about the overall purpose of the Splunk Polarity integration, right? We want to encapsulate analyst knowledge, subject matter expertise to make it really easy for everybody to leverage. A little bit about writing SPL queries to work well with the integration, including things like tstats, that really cool index discovery capability, which really allows for knowledge discovery across your Splunk deployment, how you can ignore results, leveraging multiple Splunk integrations and how easy that is to do, and giving them good descriptions so analysts know exactly what they're signing up for when they subscribe to an integration. How we, of course, as always, support a multi-SIM environment or a multi-tool environment where you've got lots of different data sources. And then if you're using Splunk, enable that source analytics. Reach out to us. We're happy to help you. So you get access to that strategic value of that high-level overview of how is my data being used, as well as that tactical value of have we seen this before? Who else is looking at what I'm currently looking at? And with that, we will go to Q&A if anyone has any questions. Thank you again for jumping in.
Thanks, Ed. Are you able to see the questions entered into the Q&A box? I'm happy to read them off.
Yes. So I see a question here. Is there a way to track all the IPs that have been ignored for audit purposes? Right now, the ignoring is done on a local level, so it is stored by the client. So it is not a global ignore list. A global ignore list is on our roadmap that we're going to be working on. So at the moment, no, although we could very much build it into the integration. So if you wanted to have the ignore at an integration level, so in other words, only ignore this within Splunk, that is a capability a lot of our integrations have, and certainly happy to kind of discuss adding that to the Splunk integration itself if it would add value for your organization. Thanks for the session so far. Did you say that you can configure the integration to search 2 or 3 integrations directly? So you can have multiple integrations installed. So let me just pull this up real quick. And hopefully this asks how I'm interpreting the question. When I run a search now on a IP, an entity, a list of IPs, any integration that I'm installed on is going to get searched. So each one of these Splunk integrations is running one specific SPL search. So for example, if I go into Splunk Vuln and I scroll down here to the custom SPL query that we're running, you can see that here's my custom SPL query. So this integration, the Splunk Vuln integration, maps to this custom SPL query. And if a user runs a search on an entity supported by that, so in this case, I'm running a search on the CVE, it's going to trigger that particular integration, the Splunk Vuln integration that I configured, run this query right here and show me the results. So in terms of searching multiple integrations, any integration that I'm enabled, that I'm subscribed to right here, all of these are going to get searched anytime I'm running a search. It just so happens today, we're really focused on Splunk. So I've been talking a lot about the Splunk results here in the overlay window. But of course, if you have other integrations installed and you're subscribed to them, those will continue to return results as well. Oh, 2 or 3 indexes from one integration with specific syntax. Yes, you can absolutely search on multiple indexes. Sorry, I should have jumped down to the second latter half of the question there. In these examples, we're only searching a single index. So for example, here we're searching the vulnerabilities index, but you absolutely can search multiple index in your SPL query. Really, any SPL query that you can craft here in the Splunk search app, you can translate that and use it in the Splunk integration. So if you had 3 indexes that you wanted to search, all part of a single integration, that's very easy to do. You just update that SPL query. In terms of performance, that really comes down to the query. I thought it was important to spend the kind of first half talking about things to do to make it performant. So it's going to really come down to the query that you're writing, the amount of data that you have in your Splunk instance. With all of the capabilities of SPL, there's almost always a way to craft a performant query. For folks that haven't used Polarity before, Polarity is all about fast real-time responses. We're not designed around, we're not really meant for kicking off a batch job and maybe coming back, 10 minutes later and getting the results. So when you are crafting those queries for Splunk, you do want to think about, is this going to come back quickly? You can always just test right here in the search app. A lot of those things that we talked about today are going to ensure that that happens quickly. So using that term directive to make sure you're only searching indexes, restricting the amount of data that comes back, restricting the search period, specifying certain fields, limiting the amount of data that comes back with the fields directive. All of these things are going to ensure that you're able to craft a performance search. The integration itself is also doing those bulk searches that I mentioned. So we're trying as efficiently as possible to look up multiple things at once. But the integration is not putting any additional overhead on your Splunk instance. It's really no different than if you were running the search here from the search app. So this is a great place to test if you'd like to test how well your query runs. In terms of the custom SPL query that you provide, there are some certain commands that we don't support. So out of the box, any of the normal search syntax is supported. We support macros, input lookup, meta search, and tstats. If there is an additional command that you like to use when you start your query, so at the beginning of your query here, definitely let us know, and we're happy to take a look at adding that. So those are the ones that our customers use most, particularly just the straight search and tstats. And if you have something that you'd like to add, definitely just let us know. We're happy to continue to improve the integration like we do with all our integrations. And I think that's all the questions that we had in the Q&A session. Thank you so much to everyone that joined today. Really appreciate everyone coming on and learning a little bit more about how Polarity can help you really optimize your Splunk usage and get the most value out of Splunk.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ed, and thanks everyone for joining. Make sure to look us up at splunk.conf if you're headed to the conference next week. We hope to see you there.